If you look at the news headlines today, or, if you dare to glance at the global debt clock,
Oh, that terrifying thing.
right, it's spinning past $315 trillion, and it just keeps accelerating. And it usually triggers one of two reactions in people.
Anger or despair.
Exactly. We get furious at what looks like just utterly incompetent politicians, or we get this sense of dread, assuming the whole economic system is fundamentally broken.
It's the standard narrative, isn't it? They mismanaged the budget again, or they printed too much money. We treat this mountain of debt like some kind of colossal accidental car crash on the financial highway.
Okay, let's stop right there. Because we're here today and unpack a hard truth that, frankly, challenges that entire assumption. The $315 trillion of global debt. It's not a mistake.
Not at all.
It isn't a failure of the system. It is, and this is the core of our deep dive today, the most perfectly functioning financial machine ever invented. And it is working exactly as designed.
That's the key. That enormous debt isn't an accident. It's a product. And the context you have to get your head around is that this system was designed meticulously over 300 years to do one thing.
Which is?
To systematically transfer wealth from the productive public, from you, the taxpayer, to a very select, very insulated financial elite. We're not really looking at economics today. We are opening a cold case file on a multi-generational financial heist.
And that brings us to the central metaphor for this whole thing, the cage. For 300 years, bar by bar, a financial cage has been built around all of us. And its purpose is, well, it's brutal, but it's also elegantly simple.
The sources make it crystal clear. The goal is to ensure that you work your entire life, not to build your own wealth, not for your retirement, but simply to service the interest payments on a debt that can never mathematically be repaid.
It's stunning when you see it laid out like that, the sheer brilliance of the design.
It's a mechanism of financial conquest, really. And we're going to name the four men responsible for the trap's blueprint. The four historical architects who designed this system where national debt is perpetually serviced and never, ever paid back.
So our mission today is to pull back that curtain and show you the blueprint. We're going to dig into four specific historical moments where the crucial locks of this cage were forged. We're talking 1694, 1815, 1913, and 1982.
And each one of those moments solved a problem for the architects. It removed a risk or a limitation, ensuring their debt machine would never stop running.
And understanding this, understanding the blueprint, it leads to a really revolutionary conclusion.
It does. The solution isn't trying to pay off the debt or, voting for some politician who promises to fix a system that isn't broken. The only real solution is to see the design and escape the structure entirely.
Move your productive assets outside the cage.
Once you understand the game, you can stop playing by their rules.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Laying the very first, heaviest bar of the cage. We have to go all the way back to London. 1694.
And the whole thing starts, as these things so often do, because a king is broke.
Which, yeah, sounds like the start of pretty much every government story ever.
The historical setting here is just. It's essential. King William III of England is fighting the 9 Years' War against France, and the monarchy has basically run out of money, completely exhausted its traditional options.
And what were those options usually?
Well, historically, a king could raise money through, special taxes or by taking out short-term loans from wealthy merchants in the city.
But those merchants expected to be paid back, right?
Exactly. They expected two things: incredibly high interest rates, because war is risky, and, this is the crucial part, full repayment of the principal amount as soon as the war was over.
That expectation of repayment, that's the key constraint, isn't it? If you know you have to pay it all back, you're naturally going to be a bit more careful about how much you borrow.
A king might think twice about starting another war if he knows he'll have to levy some really unpopular taxes to clear the debt afterward. It's a natural check on power.
Enter architect number one.
Enter William Paterson. Paterson was a Scottish financier, a merchant, and his proposal didn't just offer the king a loan, it offered him an entirely new way of thinking about finance. A new paradigm.
He wasn't just solving a cash flow problem.
No, he was inventing an entirely new class of asset for the lenders. This moment, you could argue, is the original sin of the modern financial world.
So what was it? What was this radical, game-changing idea that started the cage?
Paterson creates the Bank of England, and it's not a state institution, it's a private corporation. He proposes that a syndicate of his subscribers would loan the king £1.2 million in gold.
The radical part wasn't the amount, though.
No, it was the terms. The mechanism was something called the perpetual bond.
And the terms were?
The king was explicitly not required to pay back the principal, the 1.2 million, ever.
Never.
Ever. He only had to pay the interest, which was set at a very nice 8%, forever. The loan became a permanent fixture on the nation's books.
Forever. I mean, that one word just changes the entire definition of debt. It's not a liability you get rid of anymore. It's infrastructure.
Permanent infrastructure.
But where did the king get the money to pay this perpetual 8%? He's already broke.
He taxes the citizens. This is the eternal yoke, and it was implemented immediately. To service the interest payments on this loan, the Crown created a whole new set of excise duties.
Taxes on what?
On everyday things: beer, spirits, salt. And these taxes were dedicated only to servicing the interest on the national debt. They weren't for building roads or paying soldiers. They were a guaranteed payment to the private lenders.
So let me get this straight. Paterson created a machine where the future work and consumption of every single person in England through their taxes was permanently locked in as a guaranteed income stream for a private club of bankers.
That's the transfer. An unbelievable transfer of power and wealth. It fundamentally altered the moral landscape of national finance. Before Paterson, debt was a temporary problem. After him, it became a permanent asset for the bankers.
A guaranteed annuity.
Yes, a guaranteed, continuous income stream, secured not by some volatile asset like gold, but by the relentless future labor and taxation of the entire population.
That's the piece people miss. It's the moment debt stopped being a liability the state had to minimize and became a brilliant profit-generating feature that the financial elite had a vested interest in maximizing.
Precisely. If you get rid of the national debt, you get rid of the guaranteed 8% annuity for the bondholders. So from that moment on, the national debt was designed with the explicit goal of never being zero.
It created a class of people who get rich just by owning government paper that's backed by the work of everybody else.
The first rent seekers. And it enabled the political behavior we still see every single day: instant gratification with deferred consequences. The politician gets the cash now, the war gets funded, and the cost, that 8% interest,
Gets pushed onto the next generation of taxpayers, and the one after that, and the one after that, indefinitely.
And it creates this self-reinforcing loop. The more the nation borrowed, and they immediately started borrowing more, the more essential the Bank of England became. The state became structurally dependent on the lender.
So that one move in 1694 laid the foundation for the entire modern sovereign debt market. It started the interest clock, and the whole point was that the clock would never, ever stop.
The first bar of the cage. The whole system is built on perpetual interest. We are all, in a way, still paying the interest on that 1694 loan today. So William Paterson solves the repayment risk. He just removes the principal obligation entirely and guarantees perpetual interest through taxation. A brilliant first step. But there was still a huge constraint on the architects.
Political risk.
Exactly. Even with guaranteed interest, a king or a parliament can just say, you know what? We're broke, the people are rioting, we're defaulting on the interest.
And if they did that, the bankers would be wiped out.
Completely ruined. That risk meant that interest rates, even if they were perpetual, still had to be relatively high to compensate the lenders for that possibility of default.
The system needed a way to stabilize itself. It needed to be so dangerous to default that it became unthinkable, mandatory, not optional for governments to keep paying.
And that brings us to architect number 2, Nathan Rothschild. We're jumping forward to 1815, right at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. This is where Paterson's local interest scheme gets industrialized. It becomes a global, interconnected financial web.
Nathan Rothschild was in London, but his family was everywhere, right?
All over Europe.
Wow.
He had brothers and agents in Vienna, Paris, Frankfurt. And his innovation was realizing that to make sovereign debt truly safe, it couldn't just be backed by one government's taxes.
It had to be backed by the entire European financial ecosystem.
This sounds like the invention of liquidity as a weapon.
That is exactly what it was. Rothschild industrialized the bond market. He understood that a British government bond, that piece of paper, needed to be highly liquid, easily tradable across borders.
He had this private courier network, which was supposedly faster than any official government channel.
So he could move intelligence and actual debt instruments across the entire continent with incredible speed and certainty. He basically created a standardized, efficient, transnational marketplace for trading government debt.
Okay, but why does that matter so much more than just a king borrowing from his local bankers?
It matters because of interconnected risk. Rothschild and his family made sure that British perpetual bonds were held by banks, by aristocrats, by wealthy investors all across Europe.
Even in rival nations like Austria or Prussia.
So what's the brilliant lock he added to the cage here?
He created a system we now call too big to fail, long before anyone ever used that phrase. The implication was just profound. If Britain decided to default on its perpetual interest payments, it wouldn't just hurt the bankers in London,
It would immediately crash the banking systems in Paris, Vienna, and Frankfurt, too.
because they were all holding British debt as their primary reserve asset. It was the foundation of their own balance sheets.
Wow. So he wove a web of debt so sticky, so essential to the stability of every other financial system that no single government, no matter how angry or politically motivated, would dare to cut the strings.
The cost of defaulting became an immediate, systemic, transnational financial collapse. The risk for the lender, which was the last big weakness in Paterson's system, was basically neutralized.
And that's the moment when international government-backed debt became, and this sounds crazy, safer than gold.
How is it safer than gold? Gold is a physical thing you can hold.
It is, but gold can be seized by a local government. It can be taxed. Its value can be manipulated through coinage. But this internationally traded sovereign debt held in the Rothschild web, you couldn't default on it without triggering global financial chaos that would hurt you, the defaulting government, just as much as your creditors.
The debt transcended national borders. It became a political weapon against anyone who wouldn't play ball.
So the cage went global. The debt was sovereign, not just because it was backed by the UK, but because the stability of the entire international banking system was now structurally incentivized to make sure those interest payments kept flowing.
A tremor in London would cause an earthquake in Vienna, and that transnational incentive was the ultimate security guarantee for the architects.
This compliance piece is so important. If a government starts doing things the major financial centers don't like, the banks can just threaten to dump that nation's debt on the market.
Which would instantly drive up the government's borrowing costs, cause chaos at home, and force them to back down. The web became a tool of soft financial power over sovereign nations. It stabilized the perpetual interest machine against political will.
So the Rothschild model standardized the global market for sovereign risk, turning government debt into the foundational lowest risk asset in all of global finance.
Which of course encouraged governments everywhere to borrow even more, knowing the market was deep, liquid, and backed by this international consensus against default.
Paterson built the bars. Rothschild wrapped them in steel, making them politically and financially impossible for any single country to break. All right, so we've got the Perpetual Interest Foundation from Paterson in 1694. We've got the Global Enforcement Web from Rothschild in 1815. The machine is running, it's secure, it's making a lot of people very, very rich. But it still has one massive physical limitation.
The ceiling.
The ceiling, and that ceiling was the gold standard. For centuries, currency and lending were, at least in theory, tied to the amount of physical gold you had in your vaults.
Right. If the U.S. government wanted $1 billion to fund some huge new project or a war, but the banks and the Treasury only had $500 million in gold reserves, well, the borrowing had to stop. The party was over.
And the architects hated this. They wanted infinite leverage, infinite debt, because that meant infinite interest potential.
Which brings us to 1913 in the United States. And this moment in history is usually sold to us as this noble effort to stabilize the economy.
But from the perspective of our 300-year heist, this is the moment the architects found the infinite money glitch.
And enter architect number 3, J.P. Morgan. The setting for this was a secret meeting convened at the Jekyll Island Club in Georgia. You had this powerful group of American financiers and senators, and they drafted the framework for what would become the Federal Reserve System.
The public story was, as it always is, very benign. This new system would create a lender of last resort, it would prevent bank runs, it would stabilize the U.S. economy.
But the forensic reality, when you look at it through the lens of maximizing perpetual debt, is that the creation of the Federal Reserve, the central bank, was designed to do one thing above all else.
Remove the ceiling.
Remove the final physical ceiling on debt growth. This institution was engineered to make sure that government borrowing never, ever had to stop because of a lack of physical collateral.
Okay, let's get technical for a second. How does it actually work? We hear the phrase printing money all the time, but what's the actual mechanism that lets the Fed allow infinite borrowing?
The process today is incredibly complex, but the basic mechanism established in 1913 is the monetization of debt. So when the government, the Treasury, needs money, it issues a bond, an IOU.
Before 1913, those bonds had to be bought by private investors or banks using existing money, money that was eventually backed by gold.
But now, with the Federal Reserve in place, a new player enters the game. The Fed, through something called open market operations, buys those government bonds. But here is the trick, the absolute key.
The Fed doesn't buy them with existing money.
No, it buys them by electronically creating new reserves, new money that didn't exist a second before on its own balance sheet. This creation of money out of thin air for the sole purpose of dying government debt is the game changer. It's the instant monetization of a government liability.
So the money supply is officially unchained from any physical constraint. The government issues debt, and the central bank just creates the money to buy that debt. The government gets its cash to spend, and the national debt immediately goes up by that exact amount.
J.P. Morgan and his friends essentially gave the political class a credit card with no hard limit. This is what allowed the debt to grow to levels that were mathematically and physically impossible under a gold standard.
And it leads to endless wars, massive social programs. It's a way for politicians to buy popularity with money that doesn't really exist.
And this brings the heist full circle. The politicians get their endless credit. The economy seems liquid and fine. And the architects, the bondholders, and the big financial institutions, they earn perpetual interest on every single newly created dollar.
The interest flows back to them, and they are largely shielded from the inevitable consequence of all this printing.
Which is inflation. Inflation, in this context, is just a mechanism of silent wealth transfer. Since the debt can never actually be repaid with tax revenue, the Fed system ensures it is either rolled over with new debt or it's inflated away.
So when the money supply grows faster than the economy, the value of every dollar in your pocket in your bank account is diluted.
It's an invisible tax, a tax that services the interest payments on the national debt that's held by the financial elite.
So Morgan didn't just build another bar for the cage. He blew the roof off. He created the infinite volume of debt upon which the architects could collect infinite perpetual interest.
This is the engine that created the path to what we see today. Debt levels so huge that the annual interest payment alone is more than a nation's entire discretionary budget, forcing them to borrow more just to pay the interest.
A closed loop. Infinitely scalable, designed for continuous wealth extraction, all hidden behind the complex and, let's be honest, deliberately impenetrable veil of modern monetary policy. So, okay, we have the debt from Paterson, we have the global web from Rothschild, and now we have the infinite printer from Morgan. The cage is now gigantic, it's globally secure, and it's infinitely expandable. But every system like this, every leverage system, has a breaking point.
Absolutely. The final existential risk for the architects was still out there. What happens when a country, despite having this unlimited capacity to borrow and print, genuinely collapses under the weight of its own interest payments?
What happens when the political situation is so unstable or the debt is so huge that they just default on their international obligations? If that happens, the integrity of Rothschild's whole global web is threatened.
The architects needed one more piece. They needed an enforcer, a final, devastating lock on the cage, capable of punishing anyone who steps out of line and extracting collateral on a global scale.
Enter architect number 4. Or, maybe more accurately, the institutional policies that were really weaponized during the Paul Volcker era of the 1980s.
Yes, this is less about a single person and more about powerful institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank. The critical case study here is the Latin American debt crisis.
Right, so the late 70s, early 80s, you had a massive inflation in the U.S., and Paul Volcker at the Fed jacks up interest rates to try and fight it.
And for developing nations that had borrowed huge amounts of money in U.S. dollars, these rate hikes were a death blow. It made servicing their dollar-denominated debts almost impossible.
Countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico especially, they were crushed. They were technically bankrupt. They could not pay the interest they owed to their international creditors.
The very private banks that owned the bonds that were secured by the Rothschild model. This was the moment of truth for the entire system. Would the banks just have to take the loss?
And the answer was, of course, a resounding system guaranteeing no.
The IMF stepped in. Now, publicly, this was framed as a humanitarian bailout. Saving these struggling nations from total collapse.
But when you actually look at the fine print, what the source material shows is that this was effectively a highly profitable, systematized foreclosure for the creditors.
Okay, walk us through that. How did the IMF make sure the architects got their interest payments?
The IMF didn't send money for schools or hospitals or infrastructure. They supplied the precise amount of US dollar liquidity necessary for the indebted nation. Let's use Mexico as the example, to make its missed interest payments to the private international banks.
It was a direct transfer from the IMF's balance sheet to the private bank's balance sheet. It just took a detour through the distressed nation's treasury.
But the nations had to pay a steep price for that liquidity, and that's where the structural adjustment policies come in.
This is the ultimate weaponization of debt. To get the money they needed to pay the banks, these indebted nations were forced to implement these severe structural adjustment programs.
What did that entail?
Fiscal austerity, so cutting social spending, radical currency devaluations, removing capital controls, and most devastatingly of all, mass privatization of national assets.
Detail what that privatization looked like on the ground. This is where the wealth transfer becomes physical.
The IMF required these nations to sell off their national patrimony. We're talking about critical infrastructure and resources, privatizing their state-owned oil companies, their electricity grids, the national railway networks, the country's main telephone company, even their municipal water systems.
And these assets were sold off at fire sale prices, weren't they?
Offered to foreign corporations to generate the cash needed for the next round of interest payments.
So the nation sells its long-term future income stream, its utilities, its resources, not to pay down the principal of the debt, but just to satisfy the demand for past and present interest payments.
Is the final, brutal lock on the cage. Nations were forced to literally strip their own sovereignty to service the bankers. The debt itself became the mechanism for seizing the real, physical collateral.
That analogy of modern conquest is perfect. You don't need to conquer a country with tanks anymore. It's too expensive, too messy.
You conquer it with bonds and debt enforcement. You get them hooked on borrowing. You wait for the interest to become unpayable. And then you send in the institutional enforcer, the IMF, to seize their valuable national assets.
And this institutionalized the guarantee. It sent a message to the world that even if a nation technically defaults, it will just result in a profitable foreclosure for the architects. Paterson started the interest clock, Rothschild secured it globally, Morgan gave it infinite fuel, and the IMF institutionalized the mechanism to ensure that even failure itself was profitable. The heist is complete. So we've meticulously mapped the four corners of the cage. We have this crushing debt, the geometrically increasing interest payments, and the mathematical certainty that this debt is impossible to repay. The system is functioning exactly as it was designed to.
And the revolutionary conclusion from all of this is that we have to stop thinking about trying to fix the machine.
Yeah.
You cannot vote your way out of a $315 trillion global debt structure that was designed to never be zero.
The playbook for the individual isn't compliance.
It's structural escape.
Okay, so the sources outline two critical playbooks for you, the listener, and the distinction is everything. Playbook number one is relying on what's called inside money.
Inside money is defined by one single feature.
Yeah.
It exists inside the cage, and it is always someone else's liability. The most common examples are fiat currency, the dollars, euros, yen in your bank account, and government bonds.
These aren't really true assets, are they? They're just entries on a banker's ledger. They are the IOUs of the debtor system itself.
And the major risk that comes with inside money is what's called counterparty risk.
Explain that.
Counterparty risk means the value of your asset is completely dependent on the ability and the willingness of a second party, the government, the central bank, a commercial bank, to honor their promise.
So if the system cracks, if a central bank panics, or if inflation goes into hyperspeed because of that infinite printer,
your inside money loses its value rapidly. Or it can be frozen. Or it can be subject to bail-ins. A dollar bill is a liability of the Federal Reserve. If the Fed fails, the money is compromised.
Okay, so playbook number two, the key to escaping the cage is holding outside money.
Outside money is the absolute opposite. These are assets that carry zero counterparty risk. They exist outside the debt web, outside the banking ledger. They don't require any government or any bank to guarantee their value.
And the source material lists a few specific examples.
Gold, silver, land, and Bitcoin. They are either physical or they are mathematically scarce forms of collateral.
So why are those specific assets categorized as outside money? What makes them different?
Well, let's take gold and land. They're physical, they're tangible. Their value is intrinsic to their physical nature and their scarcity. No central bank can print more land. No government can just create more physical gold.
And Bitcoin is the digital version of that scarcity.
Exactly. Its scarcity is enforced mathematically by code, totally independent of any government or corporation. Their value is autonomous. They are not someone else's liability.
And the genius of moving your savings into outside money is that you are positioning yourself for the inevitable future wealth transfer. History shows this pattern over and over again.
When the system finally resets, and it always does, whether it's a slow collapse through inflation or a sudden dramatic crisis, wealth transfers instantly.
It flows from those holding the debt, the inside money, the cash and bonds,
To those holding the collateral, the outside money like gold, resources, land, and Bitcoin. The people holding the paper liabilities get impoverished. The people holding the non-liable collateral become the new owners.
So this is the critical moment of decision for you. The architects built a world where debt is the foundation. The escape route requires you to completely invert your position relative to that debt,
You have to stop being the payer of interest and start becoming the collector of appreciation.
which leads to the immediate, actionable step the sources suggest: become the bank.
If you're currently paying interest on consumer debt, a mortgage, a car loan, credit card debt, you are an employee of the system. You're the taxpayer guaranteeing the architect's annuity.
You have to use the inside money you have to extinguish those personal liabilities first.
Stop paying interest to the architects. Stop funding the cage. Once your own liabilities are gone, then you can begin the process of acquiring scarce collateral. You stop being the eternal payer and you start becoming the owner.
The cage, remember, is made of paper promises backed by your productivity.
And the key, as the source says, is made of metal. Or perhaps digital code.
Okay, now we get to the choice. The listener needs a concrete path out of this paper cage. We've established that both gold and Bitcoin are explicitly outside money, no counterparty risk, they exist outside the debt ledger. But which one is the superior key to unlock this 300-year financial prison?
Let's start with the case for gold. Gold is the historical, proven stabilizer. It served as money, or at least the ultimate store of value, for 5,000 years. It's universally recognized, it's deeply institutionalized, central banks still hold tons of it. It is the metal key the source mentions, rooted in tangible, physical reality.
That legacy argument is incredibly powerful. It is the default asset of last resort. But let me argue for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the direct technological counterpunch to the very mechanism J.P. Morgan installed in 1913. It was created because of the lack of accountability and the infinite printing of central banks. Its strength is its decentralization, its unseizability, and its finite supply enforced by math.
The critical comparison here really boils down to two axes. The first is stability versus velocity and portability. Gold is the undisputed benchmark for stability. It maintains its purchasing power over centuries. It's a massive, slow-moving store of energy and value.
But it's cumbersome. Moving large amounts of gold requires logistics, vaults, security. That introduces a new kind of third-party risk, doesn't it?
It does.
Bitcoin, on the other hand, offers near infinite velocity and portability. You can move $1 billion of wealth across borders in minutes with nothing more than a memorized string of words. That's essential if you're facing imminent asset seizure. The trade-off, though, is stability. It's incredibly volatile.
The second axis is physical tangibility versus its digital nature. Gold is tangible. You can hold it. And a total systemic collapse, I'm talking a major war, a grid-down scenario, physical gold still has utility and trust. Its argument is rooted in resilience against a complete breakdown of modern tech.
But the digital nature of Bitcoin is also its greatest strength against financial tyranny. It operates globally, 24/7, without banks, without custodians. It is censorship resistant. No government can easily freeze your account or stop you from transacting, which is the exact power the IMF used in 1982 to strip sovereignty. If the cage tries to enforce its rules on you, Bitcoin is arguably the hardest asset for them to reach.
And finally, we're comparing legacy collateral versus future potential. Gold is the known historical reset mechanism. Every major financial collapse, from ancient Rome to the Nixon shock, has seen gold reemerge as the primary stabilizer. It's the well-trodden escape path.
Bitcoin represents the revolutionary future potential reset. It's a technological, trust-minimized alternative to the central bank's printer. It offers the speed, security, and decentralized infrastructure needed for a digital world thing gold just fundamentally lacks. The key to escape might be the oldest technology, or it might be the newest.
Ultimately, the sources just categorize both as essential outside money. The choice really depends on your personal risk profile, your view on how the system will break, and whether you fear physical seizure more or digital censorship more. The important thing is to get out of inside money now.
We have completed the deep dive into the blueprint, We've tracked the construction of this perpetual debt machine, the cage, built bar by bar across 3 centuries by 4 brilliant strategic architects.
William Paterson defined perpetual interest in 1694, creating the foundation. Nathan Rothschild secured that debt with a global interconnected web by 1815, making it too big to fail. J.P. Morgan removed the ceiling with the infinite printer in 1913.
And the IMF, with those Volcker-era policies, provided the ultimate enforcement mechanism, the stripping of sovereignty via foreclosure in 1982.
They were, and you have to admit it, geniuses of financial architecture. They created a machine that has run successfully for 300 years, silently transferring the wealth produced by billions of people.
But every machine that's built on exponential, mathematically impossible debt has an expiration date. We are at a moment of inevitable reset.
The architects are counting on one critical factor to maintain control: that the public remains ignorant of the blueprint. They rely on inertia, on people staying as productive taxpayers, continuing to service the interest, staying trapped inside the cage until it all collapses.
They rely on us believing the system is just broken.
We challenge you to realize the profound power this knowledge gives you. Once you see the blueprint, once you understand the system is working exactly as designed, you have the opportunity to escape its jurisdiction, to stop funding its perpetual interest streams. The future does not belong to the endless payers of interest.
The future belongs to the owners of the collateral. The choice is clear, but time is running out. Are you currently holding inside money the liabilities of the system? Or are you securing outside money the collateral that stands independent?
What key will you choose for your exit? Choose wisely.
This has been The Deep Dive.